and I decided that just because it's that time of year, it's January, and even though we weren't here last week necessarily to start the week with you, it is Happy New Year. So I want to say Happy New Year and pray God's blessings as we continue the journey. And I thought as we began the year that we sort of lean back into, and I know some of you know this stuff, and I say this stuff because it's just a vernacular, but the idea of, what does it mean to be a Christ follower? What does it mean? And it's interesting, and I'll lean into this in a couple weeks, but part of the message that the students were given, I don't know if you can see this, it's kind of a crazy picture, but that was the last night we were there. There was actually 40,000 students between 3 venues, 2 in Atlanta, and our venue was sold out, so there were over 20,000 students that were just leaning into a full day, probably beyond just being with Melinda and serving with her. Ravi Zacharias, I don't know if you know that name, but Ravi Zacharias was one of the preachers, and it was impressive to see someone who most of these kids don't know how they leaned into, how they got out their journals, how they began to take notes. As Ravi is, if you don't know who he is, Ravi Zacharias Ministries, he's actually an apologist. And so he really offered the students sort of courage to talk about truth, to talk about this relationship with the God that they knew, the God that they were experiencing. And so it's one of those things, as much work as it was for Melinda and I know, and the folks we got a chance to serve with, it was just a real filling up. It's crazy that you would think getting up early and going to bed late would fill you up. But as we sat there with students, college students, many around the age of our own children, it was encouraging to know that instead of hanging out on the beaches of South Florida doing crazy stuff, that they were in an auditorium with others who were trying to figure out how to journey in their spiritual journey, how to have faith, how to grow in their faith, realizing that I don't know. Louis said this Louis Giglio, one of the founders of the movement, that I think we're living in the craziest of times. I mean, if you just think about the news and the world and just where we live today, it is just crazy. And so but I think one of the encouragements that Louis offered us was that in the craziest of times is when God shows up. And so part of my encouragement to us together as a fellowship as we journey into this new year, we celebrated an amazing Christmas, as I shared with some of you via email that before we left, as we were wrapping up the year, that last year we saw about a 10% increase in attendance, which I think is a cool thing, that we've been averaging 12 to 13 kids every weekend downstairs in our Linden Kids since we relaunched that, and really that's the future, and so that's encouraging. We're going to be sending several of our young ladies, 3 of them actually, Libby English, Gabby Horton, and Jackie Woods are going to be going on a 3-day spiritual retreat next weekend, and so we want you to be praying for them. But all those kinds of things, as I sat with, it was kind of interesting. We actually were at breakfast one morning there in the CNN Center, and we were talking with a young man. It turns out, my kids always hate it when this happens, but it turns out I actually know this young man's youth pastor, who's now his lead pastor. He's from Jacksonville, Florida, and he started talking about this amazing church he was at, and I said, do you know Joby? He says, that's my pastor. How did you know that? And it's like, well, the world's a small place. Percy knows everyone, and I know everyone that Percy doesn't know. So that's the way to wrap it up. But it was interesting. But as I talked and shared about us as a fellowship, there was a girl who sat way down in this restaurant, and she says, I'm a Presbyterian too. And it was cool. She was there by herself, and she'd come with her church, and I don't know her story, but we just had this few moments of interaction. She got up. She actually got up early, came down, got breakfast. And if you would have been with us, the most amazing thing is here you are, and the headquarters of CNN and this huge food court, this food mall, and everywhere you looked were students, either singularly or in trios and maybe quads, 3 or 4, but they had their Bibles and they had their journals. And it was clear that even the young man, as I began the conversation with him, I felt like I was interrupting because it was clear that he was up early, which is crazy because I know he was up late to be back in there, but what a joy that is. And I just share that with you that that's part of something we can celebrate, even though you weren't there and you didn't go through the journey, that together we're doing these things, and that God is moving. And so this morning I want to take us back to this idea of some things that I want to impart on you that has been imparted to me about habits. As we think about our lives, we know this, that if we think about the various aspects of our lives. We have our intellectual, we have our social, we have our emotional, we have our physical, and we have our spiritual. And if you want to develop your intellectual skills, you do study, right? You read a good book, and you lean into education. If you want to actually work on your social skills, you actually learn how to deal with people. Because you just know sometimes people, like John Ortberg says, are normal until you get to know them, and then when you get to know them, you have to figure out how to live life with them, and so how to do those kinds of things, and that actually leads into our emotional skills, which is all about processing, that we have to learn how to handle anger, that you just can't, and this is, I think, particularly in this day and age with so many marriages, and one of the reasons why I think a lot of young people don't get married is they don't know how to do this piece, partly because of the devices we have, this technology that we're always on, that they don't know how to process the idea of anger. Yeah, you're going to get ticked at me. You're going to get angry with me, and you're going to want to kick the dog, tip the cow, and the reality is that's okay. We have to learn how to process through that. And then, the physical component, well, we all know that's, Bud's waiting for the snow to continue to come down so we can get back out on the slopes. But the idea that it's about workouts. And when you do workouts, it's about hydration, and it's about nutrition, and it's about all these things that keeps you physically healthy. But in our spiritual life, it's all about these things we want to call habits. And I'm not sure we're going to go into all of them, but it's going to be an acronym. And you'll see as we push into the course, but H today is all about hanging out with God. And I sort of changed that because, well, I couldn't think of a word that started with O that had 5 letters, but or Q for quiet time, because that's how I learned it when I was in confirmation class, was this idea that we need to have a quiet time with God. And I think sometimes those kinds of things can be intimidating. So this morning, I hope to give you just a couple things there that you can fill in your worship notes as we begin to journey over these next few weeks. In fact, one thing I just want to put a plug in for right now is I've printed up a 21-day prayer journey. And the booklet's out on the back. I didn't print a bunch of them because I just didn't want to, if you want to take it, here's just a way, and there's one for each day, just sort of a way to think about some things, some scripture to read, 2 scriptures to read, and then 3 or 4 things to pray specifically for. So that's just one tool, because I really feel like as the pastor I need to be equipping you. I want you to know too that downstairs, this is cool that our young kids are actually pushing through. I don't know how many of you know this, but they actually get a take home every week. And they get this card, and on the card, actually, they're into week 2, and week 2 is don't just try, train. You can't train your spirit by trying only when you feel like it. And so actually, they're going to get points this week as they go home and talk to the families about, okay, what can you do each day to go closer to God? And I want you to write your answer next to my plan and the family's plan. So it's actually kind of a cool sort of leveraging, because you know what, as we've said before here, as I've shared, is that, and even this morning's a great example, when the weather goes south, our numbers get small, and we realize that there's some kids that aren't here necessarily, and so the idea that we can only pour into their lives, their spiritual journey, maybe 40 or 50 times in the course of a year, 40 or 50 hours, compared to the 3,000 or 4,000 hours that they spend doing other things. So it's really important that when they are here, that we equip them. And so I'm hoping that I'm messing with a few parents to say, okay, it's going to get complicated this week because your kids are going to come home and say, okay, when are we going to do this? When are we going to train? When are we going to sort of pray together as a family? When are we going to look at some scriptures? And I don't want to make a bunch of rules about it, but again, it's about equipping and really helping the family. And the cool thing is they actually get points for this. And if they bring the card back signed and they back in the points, we've actually set up a little store that they can get all sorts of interesting things. At the same time, they can save their points and do some mission work with it. So the 21-day challenge is your thing. If you want, you can take it. But as we look at this, I guess I want to ask you, some people, and we saw it at Christmas, because even Christmas was the best attended Christmas service we've had, Christmas Eve service, in probably in 5 years that I've been looking at the numbers that I have access to right at the moment. And I think it's just interesting, there were a lot of faces, and a lot of you said, our faithful said, the core said, hey, I see some people here I've not seen before, but people think that somehow that once they become a Christ follower, then all they have to do is sort of make church a habit. But I want to say for many people, it's just a tradition, that it really isn't a habit, and it really isn't about life transformation. And I really feel, as your pastor, not only feel, I feel called and compelled to be doing things in this, even in this next new season, to help you grow and to push you a little bit. So we're rethinking some things. Even how we did our stewardship campaign this year, that Living Generously was a whole different approach by showing you, first of all, the dollars that we invest back in the community, and then asking for your voice to share in that. I mean, one of the crazy things about this event we were just at called Passion, they decided that they were going to build a hospital in Syria. That they're fundraising for this 4-day event, 3-day event, that they had already picked out the piece of property in Syria. They partnered with World Vision. They knew they needed about $600,000. And so they cast vision on the last day in the morning, and then as we got to that evening worship, they actually took it, and the kids were able to give text to give. And through this, the presenters were saying, okay, make sure you talk to mom and dad, because we want you to give, but we want to make sure that you're going to use your credit card if you've got mom and dad's permission. What was crazy was about $600,000. Those kids right now, that gathering of kids has actually raised about $815,000, which means not only are they going to be able to build the hospital, which World Vision already has the plans for, in Syria, which I think actually is kind of a cool thing because it's not about bringing them to our shores, because as you listen to some of the stories, and that's sort of so no matter what your political opinion is, the fact is they're going to build a hospital because in this region in Syria, they don't have a NICU unit, NATO intensive care unit. And so it's going to be cool that right there in the midst of their people, in a safe region, they're going to have a hospital open in the next 12 months and begin to be able to serve literally tens of thousands. In fact, Louis said just by adding the extra $100,000 plus, it's about 10,000 more moms and their children that can be impacted, which I think is a thing we need to celebrate as part of the kingdom. But you come to church every week, but why do we come? Do we come to celebrate God? Or even not to be too harsh on those that aren't here this morning, but what is it about the weather that sort of said, well, I'm not going to inconvenience myself. I talked to a couple of you who actually said, I maybe wish I had stayed home. But the truth is you leaned into it. And I think that's a great picture of what the spiritual journey is all about. But sometimes trying to grow deeper in our faith is inconvenient. It's hard, and it causes us to really question. And it's in those moments that I think that God can really lean into teaching us and helping and equip us, and so that we can celebrate Jack being here this morning, not Adam, as your program says. And just even the conversation I had with Jack about the joy he had, and he was talking about, he says, I was playing with my grandfather even a year ago, and I know he can't see, but I was playing cornhole, and every time I played him, he beat me, and he couldn't see the hole. And I just think that that's just funny, and I've noticed even Percy being around here, he knows the place, he's familiar with it. So even though I sat with him, he says, I can't tell it's you. I can tell it's you by your voice, but you're just, and that I just, as you pray for Percy, those are the things that I struggle with. It's like, okay, God, what can I learn from Percy in this moment? Because I think if I were literally in that chair he was sitting in, I don't think I'd be very happy. And yet there was joy and encouragement to everyone. The other thing I noticed was Percy, as we were in the hospital, is that every person that came in to service him, he was grateful, had a heart of gratitude and said, thanks for being here. Thanks for serving. Just in that kind of way. And I know people, I think, were surprised by that, but I think that represents something I want to emulate in my life. But I want to talk about how do we sort of lean into this morning. So I want to talk about our spiritual life, and I want you to challenge you, to give you some thoughts this morning to consider that thing that is that we don't quite see because it's something that we only feel for the most part. So the goal of this whole area is really for you to live life to the fullest, to realize that even in those moments like Percy, life sort of is complicated right now. It's complicated for Nancy, and yet in those moments, God wants to be there. And in those moments, and that's why we prayed for her this morning, God wants us to see that God is assisting us in so many different ways, and he's doing that because he has an assignment for each one of us. And so what we can learn from watching Percy and Nancy lean into a period, as Percy said, I don't think I'll be back to lead choir at church. And for someone who's done that for a number of years, that has to be a huge change in his head and his heart. And that has to, at the same time, create a moment where, like faithfulness, as we heard in the Christmas story of Mary and of Elizabeth and even the wise men, that, okay, God, I don't quite understand this, but I'm going to be faithful and lean into what you've called me to be and do. Let's look at some scripture from Paul. Paul says this. He's writing as he's been with the church at Philippi, and he's gone away, but he says these things. Dearest friends, you were always so careful to follow my instructions when I was with you. And he says, and now that I am away, meaning, okay, you need to pay attention to this, you must be even more careful to put into action God's saving work in your lives, obeying God with deep reverence and fear. Now, that word fear isn't necessarily that we should go, oh. It really should be, oh God, thank you. It's a sense of awe, not a sense of fright like being with lions and tigers and bears, oh my, but actually this fear that God, this God who hung the stars in the heavens, actually is concerned about each one of us. For God is working in you, giving you the desire to obey him and the power to do what pleases him. And so Paul wants us to understand in a very serious way that God wants to be faithful. And so that's why I'm calling this time, at least this week, this first sort of tool for you is hanging out with God. Because I think quiet time sends the wrong message. Because even as I was sitting in the pew, as I was watching Nancy share her story, it's like, God, what can I offer her this morning? What can I give her as her pastor in front of a room full of people? And so I really felt compelled to go up and offer a prayer for her. So that as she leaves and goes home this morning, that she knows, because it's going to be complicated. And it's going to be complicated as soon as she steps out the door, because that could be a beautiful sight if you want to get up on the hills. But, if you've got a full day ahead of you, the idea of the weather changing, and last I looked on my phone, it said it's going to be 9 degrees tonight. That's like, here we are, we're in January. But hanging out with God, what does that look like? What does it mean? So Paul gives us this sort of first understanding. Paul was at this church, and then he left, and he's writing back to them saying, okay, when I was there, you knew how to do it. Now I'm not there. Now here's what you need to do. So even last week, when I wasn't here, and I got the text message from Tim Campbell after Nikki and I had met, and Freddie, and it's just like we didn't have enough time, and so, lesson to be learned and total fail in some ways. But here's the joy, okay? So Tim shows up, and the technology doesn't work, but he leans into sharing his story about what he's doing downtown Mansfield. He brings a young man with him. Actually, the young man he was supposed to bring with him didn't make it. And so another man shows up in the middle of the service to sort of lead worship. And I know some of the folks, I heard all sorts of things like, it was okay, it was a complete flop. But here's where it turns in a different way. And I don't know who did this, but here's how it happens. So they leave here as a group, and they go to Bob Evans, okay? And while they're having a meal at Bob Evans, they get ready to pay their bill, and somebody's paid the ticket for them. Now, for young Jordan, who was the music, who was anxious about being here, that blew that young man's mind. That blew the young man's mind. And someone who didn't know them, because he really felt like a failure. And so that act of generosity actually blessed that young man to where he's got a whole different view because of the experience he leaned into. Now, from our perspective, it's like, well, this didn't work, this didn't work, this didn't work. And God is saying in the midst of that, I know, but that wasn't the purpose. The purpose wasn't whether or not it worked for you. I wanted to send a message to this young man, Jordan, that there is generous people in a community that he just moved to. And so what did they do? They leaned into being generous, and they took the money that they would have paid for the meal, and they blessed the waitress with a $40 tip. Now, that is like, and so if I hadn't gone away, and if Tim hadn't showed up, and if Tim's music guy hadn't ended up in the emergency room, then, as good Presbyterians, I don't want to say it's all ordered, but you see, we somehow look at it in the moment thinking, okay, this didn't work, this didn't work, this didn't work. But in the reality of it, God says, I'm going to make it work, because it's not about you. It's not about you. And so in those moments and in these encouragements, that's why beginning this first week to talk about hanging out with God. What does that look like? And so I'm not talking about that you have to sit in the corner, cross your legs, and hold your hands out and click cymbals and go, That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm saying in those moments that how do you lean into God? How can I be Jesus to somebody? And maybe it is paying it forward. Maybe it's just a word of encouragement, a shoulder tap, or a side hug, or just being intentional with somebody. And so it's those kind of things. So a couple points so you can fill in your blanks if you're that kind of person like I am. So the first point is this. Your relationship with God is meant to grow. And so even if you're at a point in your life where you're retired and you think you're done growing, I'm going to say, no, you're not. And that even that story I share with you, that there's things that you can do in a certain season in your life that some others can't. And so that's why you have to risk that, because that's what God's requiring out of you. Imagine this. Imagine that, on September 22nd, 1979, Melinda and I stood in front of a church in Ashland, and she said, I do. Now imagine that after that point, that we decided to move into a separate houses next door to each other, and that we would just sort of hang out maybe Valentine's Day and maybe her birthday and maybe the anniversary, what kind of relationship would we have? I'm going to say that we wouldn't be together 36 plus years later, because it takes intentionality. And no different than our spiritual journey. So the idea of why Sunday morning, even when the weather is a little dicey, I get it, there may be health reasons where you say, no, I'm going to lean into it because God has something for me this morning. He has something that maybe I can give somebody else. And that's the purpose of why we want to be intentional with all that we offer here. So what is this next step is really, I want you to see this, is that spiritual growth is a lifelong journey. There are things, I'm humbled, and again, this is a commercial, I guess, for the men's brown bag at Thursdays at noon. I'm humbled that I'm sitting, sort of in the lead chair now for where Bob Solin's been for many, many years, trying to help unpack, and I decided, okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning because I don't know where else to start, so we're leaning into some really interesting conversations about the book of Genesis. And we're into week 7, so if your time's free on Thursday at noon, please come and join us and just enjoy the fellowship and the conversation, because it really is about this journey. And there are things that I'm learning even as I sit with Percy to realize that it's not about a destination. My only regret in some regards about some things in life is like with Percy is I didn't get to know him until just the last year. I mean, what an incredible servant, what an incredible heart that he has for others, and it's clear in this time. And so, I just want to put my A game on to be as best as I can to offer him, even though I may have to talk a little louder into his ear, to be there, to be present, and be inconvenienced, because I think that's what God calls all of us to be, and I want to model that. And finally, this developing your spiritual habits will help you grow on your own, because you see, like even this morning, when we're not in church, I mean, there's things that we're missing out on. And the church isn't just to show up and sort of walk through the process, even though, like even this morning, I had it all mapped out. It's all here by the minutes, and then we realized that the weather's changing, and it's like, okay, God. And even Jack, as an 8th grader, says, yeah, sometimes you just plan, and then you just go with plan B. And I'm going, yep. That's becoming one of my operative phrases, because on the one hand, I get it because we want to be able to plan for it, but on the other hand, I don't want to miss the spontaneous. And so each week, I feel an obligation as your pastor to try to help create something here, not only downstairs, but in this room, to where we're going to be challenged by each other's presence to grow together, and to actually leverage what the kingdom can be here in Mansfield, Ohio. Not just the corner of Linden and Maple, but actually, in Mansfield and in the region and the world, because I think that's what God's calling us to be a part of. And so we need to realize that you have a responsibility, and that's why even the small groups and other things that we offer, the adult Sunday school, and before worship time. So here's a couple things. Paul says, and now that I am away from you, you must be even more careful to put into action God's work in your life by obeying him. So the habit here, the first time I want to talk is really about this idea of hanging with God. So here's what happens when you spend time with God. Okay, it changes your heart, and that's the first thing. So, and I don't know what that spending time looks like. And I'll go into this in just a second, but David says, don't keep looking at my sins. Remove the stain of my guilt. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. And so the reason why we want to be, just like why I moved in with Melinda after we said I do, and we set up home, is that I want to get to know her. I want to get to know and journey with her. And as we become a husband and wife and then become parents, and even yesterday as we went to Columbus and celebrated, Jed's birthday is actually today, and it was kind of fun. We popped in on Sarah, and she was busy at her restaurant, but it was just a joy. And I've not had a lot of margin to do that in a number of years. And so that was a blessing. I was grateful for that. Because you see, it's in those moments that our hearts could change. The second point, I guess, is this. He gives you direction for living. That the reason why you want to get to know God, because in those moments, and that's all that I could offer Percy and Nancy in some regards, is like, I don't know what to do for you because I can't do it for you. All I know is you just need to keep loving Jesus. And he will give you direction in these moments when you're thinking about just all of that's there. God says, again, through David, your commandments give me understanding. No wonder I hate every false way of life. Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light for my path. It's part of what God desires for us. I mean, sometimes, we all have this thing, and even yesterday it was interesting. We were trying to get to my son's house in Grove City, and Google, it's a wonderful thing, but if you have Google set to walking and you're in your car, it isn't going to take you the same way. And so we were there on the one side of Grove City driving. It's like, I can see it, but every time I change my phone, it changes a different direction. It's like, this is really frustrating. And then I realized, it's got the little walking icon, which is like, it's trying to give me the shortest route, and I need it because I'm in this big car. And so it's in those moments that, but you see, this is God's love letter. And it's in this that life is clear. And so it may not be clear in this, because this is sort of man-made and complicated. This is God's inspired word for you. And so in those moments, when you're not sure about life, it's in this that we can trust. Even though it may not take away the angst of realizing that you need to call 911, or the angst that life has turned financially in a way that maybe you don't want. But really it's about trusting Him and seeing that God, because of the truth of that David gives us, that every commandment gives me understanding. And I love how David says this, because no wonder when sort of what he's saying is, no wonder I hate everything that doesn't make sense, because it really is about who God is. It really is about who God is and how He'll show up in my life. Because you see, this final point here is that God is there in our problems. He's there during the tough times. He's there when you struggle. He cares more about your pain than any one of us can understand. He cares more about your pain than you do. And so it's important for us to see this. It's not a surprise to God. And so God says this to the church at Corinth through Paul. He, God, comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When others are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. And so that's the point of life. The reason why we experience certain things is so that we are prepared to reach out, to take the assistance God has given us and offer it to others. That our pain matters. That literally the scars that we experience, whether they're emotional or physical, that those scars happen so that we can offer others. And sometimes you don't know all the details because maybe the wounds are still fresh. But the idea of being in this thing together called life is really what God wants us to do. And so that's why this idea of the habit of hanging with God. And so here's the final 3 points. Simply this. It's just, okay, what do we need to do this? So we need to make time with God a priority. Now, I want you to see number 2, take the time regularly. Some people would say make the time. You can't make time. You can't make time. The one thing that we all share in this room is we have the same number of minutes in every hour of every day. So the question is, what do you take the time to do? Which means you may have to be inconvenienced. I say this to the students. The students can download and sort of absorb about 7.5 hours of content a day. Digitally, sounds. So maybe what they need to do is stop playing the Xbox for an extra 15 minutes. It doesn't take a lot of time. The idea is just to take the time, to make it happen in that regard. It's about a conscious choice. And then finally, hang out with comfort rather than guilt. But a lot of times we get so wrapped up, and I don't know how many people have done this. Anybody started a Bible study this year? I mean, you can say, okay, I'm going to read the Bible for the whole year. I'm going to actually get out my Bible, and we're going to start reading 3 chapters a day, and I'm going to make it through the Bible in 365 days. And you get to about day 11, which is tomorrow, and you go, okay, this is really, I can't do this. Now, I've told you this before, but actually on YouVersion, you can take and do a Bible plan. And what's great about YouVersion is that it'll actually email you. You sign up for the plan, it'll email you, tell you when you're behind, and then if you want to get caught up, they actually have a little button, get caught up. It just resets the start and end date. It just moves it ahead. So you don't have to feel guilty because life comes at us, and we need to sort of lean into that. But you need to make it the idea of hanging out with God a priority. You need to take the time regularly, and then you need to hang out with the idea that God is there in the midst of it, because we're always going to struggle. We're always going to struggle. And see, the whole point of this is this simply, and it's just sort of the final thought, that if you develop this habit, it will change your life not only now, but for eternity, because it's going to give you a whole different perspective. And so I know many of you've been faithful members of this church or other churches. You've grown up in the church, and you're really at a season in your life going, okay, I got this thing down, but I just want to encourage you to lean back into it together. As we talk over these next couple weeks, I want to invite you to join me in this 21-day prayer challenge and just see what might come from it as we together gather each week to see how God might show up and what He wants to do with us. Because I know we can't do it on our own. One of the most amazing things I thought about Passion was, and as we got there a day early to set up in this arena, we were in the Phillips Arena downtown, is one of the areas that they took a lot of time and intentionality with was a prayer room. It was literally right next to the stage, and it was a place that they didn't just take me. It was kind of odd because it was actually the Atlanta Falcons, Atlanta Hawks. It was their locker room. So there were actually urinals on the one wall. But these folks who planned this thing out, they go, okay, we don't want that to be a distraction. So they actually brought in these cool modular walls that, unless you were the guy setting it up with a team of 6 other people, you wouldn't have known that there was a row of 40 urinals there next to the thrones, of porcelain also, and how they created the space. And one of the cool center points of the space was actually this amazing tapestry that was the city of Atlanta. And so as they were inviting people to come in and pray for the speakers and for the students, that they were actually focusing on the difference they wanted to make in their own city there. And so that's the encouragement I want to give us this week as we lean into this new year. Let me just share a video here, and maybe I'll help re-emphasize that. So bring up the audio a little bit.
Bad habits. We've all got one, or 6. You know what I'm talking about. Picking your nose, biting your fingernails, sleeping with your makeup on, being late for everything, or junk food for days. And that's just the person sitting next to you right now. Well, it's been said that it takes 21 days to form a new habit. So what if you went on a journey in the next 3 weeks to start something new, or cement something you struggle doing? Something positive. Something good. Take the Habits Challenge. For the next 21 days, hang with God for a short, focused time each day. Get some accountability once a week for your struggles. Make Bible memorization a priority. Get involved somewhere in your church. Give a tithe in the offering basket. Study the same passage of Scripture over a few times. You might be surprised what happens. At the end of 21 days, you won't be perfect, but you certainly will have made some progress. Time with God changes you, giving and serving changes your heart, and people journeying with you helps your decisions. 21 days might not change everything, but it could change a lot. Start a good habit today.
All right, let's pray. God, we're grateful that you are not far from us, that you do bind up the hearts of the brokenhearted. And so this morning we just come before you as your people, humbled by the work that you've done for us. And this morning we just thank you that you continue to pursue us and chase us and love us, even when sometimes we're not very lovable. So I just pray your blessing upon our remaining time. Thank you for the hearts of each person that's here, the place you've called them to serve. And just pray, God, that as they would lean into maybe being more intentional this week, that they would sense your presence. Thank you for just the privilege of gathering in this place, in this time. And we just ask your blessing even on those that aren't here this morning for whatever reason, that you would continue to move in their lives. Thank you for just the hearts of your people to serve you, and we just ask that you would go with us now in your most precious name. And all God's people said, Amen. I want to share